Hey everyone, welcome to Type Talks. Today we have Ben Vaserland and Jonathan, and they're going to talk about Enneagram cures these socionics and their own model. And so nice to have you.
Thank you. You're going to be. I'm going to be debuting a lot of stuff on here. Well, three things. The idea of subfunctions, which is just my idea that what it was a reaction to Victor Galenka, who's like a very big socionist. And he has the system of DCNH, a system of subtypes, where you've got a dominant subtype, a creative subtype, a normalizing subtype, and a harmonizing subtype. And for example, he thought that someone would be a creative subtype if they have extra SE or NE or FE. I mean, maybe because like artistic expression. But I thought, hang on a minute, I think there's a creative version of every function. And I also thought, I think there's an assertive version of every function and a harmonizing version of every function. So that's how that started. But you want me to go? I know you wanted to go back a minute. Like, how did all this start? Right. So in 2013, I was on a couple of other people's channels, and then sort of like doing it sort of Google Hangouts behind the scenes. And then the first Google Hangout I hosted was with Elena Ames, ESFJ, and she has that name publicly on YouTube. YouTube channel's listed as that. And it was about, it was SWEB, Socionics with Elena and Ben. And just after that, Elena invited me to an event with Victor Galenka, where people were paying to ask him questions. And afterwards, I had an any moment. I just thought I'd take a chance because I'd recently seen a Dario Nardi video, his Google Authors video from 2011, where he was talking about neuroscience of personality. And it was Jeff Miller, ESFP, that told me about that. And so I thought, I will send Victor the video of Dario talking. And he was very impressed. And because I knew Dario a little bit because of libertarian things, I was able to put a chat together with Elena, Victor, Dario, and myself. And then, like, Elena, right, Ben, we're going to do an event in your hosting. And that happened in January 2015. And then so we started to do the events between Victor Galenka and Dario Nardi. And it was around that time that I learned about Model G. And when I first saw it, Victor listed INTP, so that's LII, as LT, logic and time. And I thought, hang on a minute, where's my NE? I was a little bit put off by this. And so what I then ended up doing was I then came up with this system of I wanted to sit on the fence between MBTI and Model A that would have, say, INTP as TINE, and Victor, who would have INTP as TINI. And so I came up with TINX. And now, 5 years later, in Dario's book, he writes, we should call the types SITX, for example. So 5 years later, Dario reaches the same point as me, but for different reasons.
Congratulations.
Thank you, Jonathan. Then, so I do these Model G things, and then eventually, at one point, this is where Jonathan comes in. Were you watching a video and then somebody mentioned Enneagram?
I think, well, firstly, I was in I did video there with Michael Pierce with a few other people.
Yep.
And then, so I was just binge watching as many videos on type systems that I could. And I was watching yours talking about socionics, and you were in with Wojtek. There's another guest who shows up in the channel. And you'd run out of things to talk about. Two INTPs with nothing to talk about is very strange. And then you mentioned, you asked him if he knew anything about Enneagram. He said no. And I wrote in the comment, I know about Enneagram. And he said, oh, that's interesting. They invited me on right there and then. and the rest is history.
Another NE moment. And
Yeah.
then so that's 2 NE moments that have paid off. And then a third NE moment. I contacted Catherine Farver and I said, hey, here's Jonathan. Look, he knows a lot about Enneagram. Would you like to be interviewed by us? Boom, paid off. And then, so how did that go then, Jonathan? The events with Catherine and then...
Well, they've went well enough that I'm in the middle of certification, and we've done quite a few videos with her. Catherine Farber is a very prominent Enneagram expert and teacher, decades of experience. So that's quite a thing.
Yep.
That's quite the good SI history layout of this whole shebang here. Thank you for providing that. And so
there's a little bit more. There's more.
Yeah, definitely.
We did a few videos with Tom Condon, and I think your viewers will be very interested in that because I think quite a big proportion of your viewers would also be interested in NLP.
Yeah, so he's another Enneagram teacher. He does NLP as well.
Yeah, and he started in the NLP world. I think he doesn't know much about. He doesn't really know Jungian type at all, but I get the impression that he might be like ISFP or ISTP, given the way he talks about Enneagram, and he seems to have that like concrete preference. And I like his approach to Enneagram in that he's a little bit skeptical, and then he talks about Enneagram styles, and because he doesn't want people to sort of like over-identify with an Enneagram type. And sort of wear it as a sort of jail sentence, sort of type loosely, that sort of thing. And he's like really taking those, the NLP principles of the map is not the territory it represents, that kind of thing. Any other big guests? Oh yes, here's an important one, especially for your NFs, the viewer. Carol Linden, communication expert. We've done about 20 to 40 videos with her. She runs the website effectivewithpeople.com. And so she's lots of good, and we've done some videos with her on the language of the functions. Just like what language to use with FJs, FPs, NJs, MPs, that sort of thing, TJs, TPs. I think that's them. Are there any other big guests, Jonathan, besides yourself?
Well, I'm not a big guest. I'm only 5'6". With so many guests on, it's hard to say. I'll probably think of more. We've had so many people on, so yeah. And we've had a few YouTubers that haven't made videos as much these days, I don't think. But yeah,
we had Leon on, and I've seen you've interviewed Leon Joyce. Yeah,
Leon's
and
great.
We did an interesting video on his channel where we Jonathan Enneagram typed him, and it was a mind opener for me because he came out as an Enneagram 9. And me being somewhat prejudiced about Enneagram, when I sort of read about the 9, I thought it was impossible for an INFP to be a 9 based on the definition of FI. But he opened my mind, Leon, as to how that operates for him. And so if people want to see how that works, if they see that video, it's fascinating.
Well, it's probably private now, but...
Oh,
no, I've seen it. I've seen it. No, because it's on his channel, Jonathan.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Right. Yeah.
And you're free to also invite me on if you'd like as well. I'd be.
I was having that plan already. I'd be super happy to have you on, Joyce, especially to talk about some NLP things, because I think it's important how we talk about NLP to sort of like get around the fact to avoid its bad reputation.
Definitely. Anything else to get out the SI history completely there?
Okay, it's a little bit more. Yeah. I've had because I've come into contact with some other people that have been can name their names. Mitchell, that's Vaserlan. He has a blog. He's the blog Vaserlan, the blogger, and Andrei, and they are studying Victor's socionic system very closely. So Mitchell is literally a member of the Eureka Club. So just like Jonathan is a paying member to be taught by Catherine, Mitchell is a paying member to be taught by Victor. And so some theoretical differences have come up around Model G, around the ignoring function. And because of that, I now present Model G as Model G star, because it's my own particular interpretation. Because the big difference is that I've learned from Mitchell and Andrei that in the proper Model G, the weakest function, for example, in INFJ is NE. I do not agree with that. And I don't agree that TE is my weakest function. So that sort of like was one of the things going along the lines of development towards Model V. Another thing was I looked at Shalina, kept on telling me, she kept on mentioning Marie-Louise van Franz and Van der Hoop. And then I looked at Van der Hoop, and then I looked at Van der Hoop's model. And then
you should probably explain who Van der Hoop is.
Okay, I will. Yeah, because this is like the story of how I got to model. I'm just going to put his. What's weird is there's a book out there. Joyce, have you read the book Gifts Differing by Isabel Myers?
Yeah, I have.
Now, in that book, conscious orientation is mentioned 10 times. But you're probably still one of those people who never went to look at conscious orientation, even though it's been mentioned in that book. And loads of people have read it, but they've not looked at conscious orientation. And maybe it was maybe it's a bad title. And maybe that's what sort of put you off. It didn't grab you as this is a typology book. So Jonathan, can you fill for a little bit whilst I get the graphic ready?
Yeah, so Van der Hoop, by the way, was a student of Jung who did a lot of his own work. So that's a lot of his own work on typology. So that's where all that comes from. So my own story, just to fill the time, is that I've been aware of Myers-Briggs for years because I came across the internet, and I kind of had a love-hate relationship with it for a while because, like a lot of people, I did the online tests, got results, seemed interesting at first, then I looked more into it, and it seemed to be not much to it. One day, I did it again, for some reason, I got very angry. I don't know why. And I was really determined to find out if this was true or not, and that's why I went out to cognitive functions, and I started looking at forums and stuff and learned about Enneagram and socionics, and I just started binging all these different videos and buying books and reading up on all this stuff, and that's how I came on to Ben's channel. And then I'm now in the process of certification, like I said, with the Enneagram. And yeah, just lots and lots and lots of reading and doing interviews with people and learning and so on. And yeah.
So I am ready to share the screen. So if Joyce will do click. Thank you. So this is the back of his book, and this is his. I call it his rings model. And so there you can just see that as like, and I like this little thing that he's done there with.
This is Van der Hoop, by the way.
Yeah, this is Van der Hoop. Yes. I like the idea that the introvert has a little bit of access to the unknown self, and the extrovert has a little bit of access to the unknown world, but it's more of a wall in terms of access to the unknown self, and that sort of makes sense because they reflect less often. They're in a state of reflection less often. And so that's towards the end of his book. And then when he gets to here, now, unfortunate word choice, impulse, but he actually means impulse to habit. and he's got whole chapters on the functions. But I mean, world as possibilities. I think that's any. Well, I think they line up to our pretty much modern definitions of the functions. Unless you wish to object. It's just impulse to sort of put, because we associate that with SE, impulse. And the thing that will strike you, sphere of instinct, is gone and renamed sensing to instinct, and we'll get onto that later. It's a bugbear of mine. And then when he does his rings model, this is his model of INTP. And so what we have here, an 8-function model in 1937. An 8-function model. And so originally in Model V, I called it a nucleus and a counternucleus because of what Vanderhoop's done here, like you've got counternucleus. And so I thought, I'll simplify it and I'll make this the counter. Because if you notice here, all of these functions that are within the default field of consciousness are NT functions. And there you've got the SF functions within the counternucleus. And so that's similar here to Model V, where I've put the NT functions over there and the SF functions there, because I call these the club functions. And in Dario Nardi's data, he said that, so for example, here, so this would be a Model V of INTP, where this would be the strongest function. Second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, and eighth strongest function. So it's simple in that point of view, in that you can see the progression from strongest to weakest. And Dario said that because he did, have you done the keys to cognition test, Joyce?
Yes.
Right, so that's keystocognition.com, folks. And so he's got a fancy name for that test. He calls it the CPA, the Cognitive Processes Assessment. And in the back of the Magic Diamond, have you got the Magic Diamond, Joyce?
Yeah, I do.
Right, excellent. At the back of that, in Appendix D, he talks about minor Baromè's analysis of. Now I probably like you. Have you taken the Keys to Cognition test more than once?
No.
Okay, you've got discipline, because I know some people have taken it more than once, and so that's why I say that 130,000 times the test has been taken rather than 130,000 people who have taken it. Anyhow, so in his results, he said that the clubs are very important. Like, and he gave the example of ENFJ, where he said ENFJ are type with strong extroverted feeling and intuition second, and the weakest functions are going to be sensing and thinking. And so basically this model is consistent with Vanderhoop. It's consistent with Dario's results. And it's consistent with Model A in a certain respect, where the NT functions are at the top and the bottom. It's just got a weird ordering, Model A, where it goes strong, weak, strong. And then the top 2 rows are conscious, and then the bottom 2 rows are unconscious. And then when you ask the socionics people about that, it goes, not really. Why call it that then? It's like, and so they've got names that don't really work very well. Like, and it's sort of metaphorical, where they've got ego, super id. But then when you ask them, so are the id functions unconscious? No. So like I said, it doesn't make sense. And sort of their names don't really work. Whereas with this, we can look at that like default field of operation, situational field of operation. So at the moment, all 3 of us are situationally extroverting, but our default state is that of introverting. So Vanderhoop. Why did I mention Vanderhoop, Jonathan?
Oh.
Anyway, this is just to show. Anyway, his rings model. So, so he came up with the importance of that. So, for instance, just in terms of the area on the graph, Oh yeah, he calls it polarity, not to be confused with the polar function. So he thought you could have INTPs that didn't have very conscious sensing and feeling, and it's just sort of like lived in like NT clubland. And so he then described what could happen, and if they develop this, they say they become a polarized type when they develop the SF functions. And so I'll mention that bit here. Carl Jung wrote about only in neurosis does the inferior function become semi-unconscious. But this is an example where, and this matches our modern appreciation, where we think we can develop these lower functions and integrate them and become a more rounded individual. And so he gives the example here of, say, feeling being integrated into INTP. But where there is greater freedom in thought, we get a morality founded on principles and reason, capable of giving rise to fresh insight into the life of feeling. The ordinary orientation of the introverted thinking type may, as a consequence of this kind of complication, undergo considerable alteration. And if the INTP in question is also a 6, that might also complicate things with a 6, 4, and a 1 in there, because you were interested in that, like what my experience was like as an INTP with such an odd Enneagram type. Like any INTP that's not a 5, it's like, what are you? Sort of thing. Right. I'll just show you what it's like for ENFP. That would be an example of the rings model for ENFP. And you can see that the FE is quite large. And if you're probably thinking, okay, how does ENFP use FE? Well, pretty much in the same way that Kersey sees them. So Kersey has ENFP as, like here, predisposed to the role of mediator advocator, social causes. And I've just got bits in here that I think sound like ENFP using FE. These people often possess a remarkable ability in the presentation of ideals and plans in a vivid manner, making use of their personal relationships to realize them, owing to the charm with which characterizes these people, in whom feeling and intuition are combined, and to the persuasive force of their intuitions, they're often capable of exerting powerful influence. And then, when in a state of introversion, their subsidiary function manifests itself in a more independent form. So it's almost like when ENFP is in a state of extroversion, their feeling is more extroverted. And when ENFP is in a state of introversion, their feeling is more introverted. So, again, more independent form, and it's more like an FI dom. So yeah, but we can get onto that. Is that? Yeah, that's model. Yeah, that's model V. Yeah, for them. Yeah. Right. I feel like I'm rambling a bit. So yeah, that's a little bit abstruse. So what I was thinking is that in order to give the audience something like solid, like, why are we here? Let's give them something they can use. Subfunctions. Yes, that was it. Subfunctions. So I can sort of get your thoughts on this. Oh, a student of Jung. Oh, very good, Jonathan. Right, yes. And he was a psychiatrist. So you've read Dario's... So Joyce, you've got Magic Diamond. Have you read his book, 8 Keys to Self-Leadership?
Yeah, I have.
Right, excellent. Excellent, because some of these definitions are influenced by Dario. Because, especially for sensing, his sensing definitions, because Dario's definitions really are... I mean, Dario's definition of SE and SI really is coming from the temperament, because Linda Berens, massive on temperament, and Linda Berens was mentored by David Kersey. And so Linda Berens thought, oh, I like temperament, but she also likes functions, and she tried to integrate functions and temperament. And I think she did that well. Right, you were amused there by something off camera, Joyce.
Yeah, because I had a viewer just realize that this is live, and they're like, wow.
Yeah, Yes, this is just Ben having a ramble. So, do you agree with the definition I've got there for SE as a core? And if not, why not? I'm prepared to change it.
It's definitely SE. Yeah. SE is like a fluidity and adaptability with the outer physical world. Yeah.
Yeah, and also that's one of the self-image words of artisans. Artistry, audacity, adaptability. Adaptability, yeah, is one of their self-image words. They see themselves as adaptable. Also, and so, how much do you know about socionics, Joyce?
I don't know anything.
Okay, that's fair enough. Okay, so socionics. So Jonathan, could you give us your metaphor for how you treat socionics?
Well, first I'll explain what socionics is. So socionics was developed by a doctor named Astra in the Soviet Union back in the 80s. It's basically a combination of Jung's theory and something called information elements, or information metabolism. Yeah, information metabolism.
Anton Kapinski, I think.
Yeah, so a Russian biology theory or whatever. So basically, it's coming from the same place as MBTI, but they define the functions slightly differently and they use slightly different terminology. And as the name socionic suggests, there's a stronger emphasis on society and how the types live in society and how they relate to each other. So there's, for example, a long list of categories like two INFJs would be identical, whereas an INFJ and an INTJ would be called kindred. An INFJ and an ISTP would be activity relations, and then there's supervisor and conflictor and all these different things. So you can get into the nitty-gritty with that, and you can also get into the names of where the functions are. For example, for an INFJ, extroverted thinking is called your point of least resistance function or polar function, also called your vulnerable function. So the idea is that extroverted thinking is the worst function for an INFJ. It's the one that they have the hardest time dealing with. For an INTP, it is extroverted sensing. For an INTJ, it's extroverted feeling, and so on. So that's all the...
Yeah. And I'll just say, though, and that's one of the best things. If you're trying to market socionics to an MBTI person, it's like, say, polar function, and just talk about the polar function. And he said, yeah, you're right. INTJs aren't very expressive. They do have reduced affect display and look like they've just been revivified.
Well, some do, others learn to smile, but it's a bit...
Yes. Or it lasts like a split second and it's gone. Like you get that with Haley. But I just want to say, when we talk about... But Jonathan, do you want to do your metaphor about the utility of socionics and how you treat it?
Okay, I made this joke once and Ben keeps making me say it because he thinks it's so amusing. I think that's NE with SI paired.
Maybe.
Yeah. So my metaphor was, I see socionics as something I'm going to hunt down and kill and just take the bits and pieces that are useful and discard the rest. Because there's a lot of arguments and there's a lot of debate and conflict over how compatible socionics is with Myers-Briggs, because they're coming from the same place, but they're defining functions in kind of different ways. For example, extroverted sensing in socionics, there's a more emphasis on it being about power and power sensing and how assertive you are and things like that. Whereas in Myers-Briggs, there's a bit of that there, but it's more about being in the moment and being in the zone and so on. So, yeah, there's the difference between... The question is basically, are they describing different things or are they describing the same thing in different ways? And because socionics is coming from Jung, but combining it with something else, you can make the case either way.
Yeah, and I would just say that if you compare in the abstract types in Kersey and the abstract types and the intuitive types in socionics, I 100% believe that they are describing the same types. I do, because it's just like the Kersey predisposed roles, they line up with the function pairs. So for example, NTJs with the intuition of time, like coordinating resources to sort of like enact long-term projects. You can go, okay, that matches NI with TE, or when Kersey talks about constructing for NTPs, like configurations and structures and stuff, okay, that matches NE and TI. And so for the abstract types, I believe they are describing the same types. There's slight differences with the sensory extroverts, the ES types, but I still think they're describing the same types. The problem is the IS types. So, and usually in socionics, you can do a thing called the JP switch, where, so for example, Jonathan in socionics would be listed as, and I insist that the socionics people, if you're a socionics person and you're doing this, I insist you do it lowercase so that we know it's a socionic. So in socionics, they would list him as INF little p, and then the little p referring to the rationality, irrationality of the leading function, because INFJ leads with NI. So, but usually the socionics people know not to list it like that if they're English language, because they don't want to cause confusion with the MBTI 4-letter code. And so if you see that, you can do the JP switch. The problem, so here's an example of some of the profiles I looked at. And this is Victor Galenka's book. It's on, you've got 64 subtypes in this. And so, and here's one of the problems you can get with the sensory introverts. And so he has a subtype called the normalizing subtype. But for me, that's guardians. All guardians are like normalizing. So it's a way to see guardians. So for example, there's this type called SEI. Go on, Jonathan.
I was going to say the normalized subtype is like the SJs of every type. So
yeah, good point.
I'm the normalizing subtype of INFJ, so I'm an INFJ that might seem a bit more SJ-ish in some respects.
Yeah, and that fits your 1 as well. You're a little bit of Enneagram 1.
I'm a type 1 in Enneagram.
Yeah. So, but this is sort of where it can get complicated, is that you can have subtypes. One of the subtypes, I mean, normalizing subtype, on the whole, I think SEI, for example, and this is still SIFE in socionics, will read like a Kersey ISFJ. I call it KBN, Kersey, Behrens, Nardi, because I don't really look at the MBTI profiles. I've only got books by Kersey, Behrens, and Nardi, and I think they're of a higher status. Like, you've read Dario's book, like, he's a smart guy, he knows what he's doing, he's put the time and effort in. He's doing the science, and then you've got Kersey, was like a proper psychologist, and Behrens is like the bridge between those two. So I would say that matches ISFJ, but here's the weird ones, is when we get to something like this one, LSI. One subtype is like ISTP. It even mentions like working on car parts, and it's like all like the cliches that you get of like ISTP from MBTI and Kersey about like them being a mechanic and stuff and working on stuff and being a good fighter. That's in the profile, that's in the subtype profile of LSI, TISE. The problem is the core type sounds like ISTJ, and it's even called the inspector. So it's like, it's almost as if Victor is trying to correct a mistake that's occurred at a higher level. And I'll explain why I think that mistake has occurred in a moment. So yeah, what was I going to show before this? Oh yeah, so the reason why they've made this mistake is that the socionics people have looked at the behavior of, say, an ISTJ, and they see that the behavior is very structured. And so they go, oh, that's structural logic. And they've got a slightly different definition of TI. They sort of define it as the logic of laws. And so when they look at an ISTJ, they go, oh, that's very rigid. That's very logical. That's very structured. But from our point of view, because MBTI has been influenced so much by Kersey, we look at it like this. It's the temperament that leads to those actions. And what socionics is doing is it's pointing at the action, say, of ISTJ and saying, oh, that's logic and structured. But what's led to that is the SI, the wanting consistency with the past and your own sort of subjective, and because of an instinct of minimizing risk, of an attitude of if it ain't broke, don't fix it, of looking towards an authority to do things in a way that has worked before. And so that sort of, and when you combine that with T, it sort of leads to structured behaviors. And so because they've misunderstood that, they end up with types being misclassified. And I can prove it. I've got like 6 different ways to prove it. One of them is, for example, that someone on my channel, so this is the really disappointing thing about Socionics, is that it's got so many great ideas in it. Intertype relations, romance styles, an 8-function model, but it's got this quarter of it when it comes to these IS types, where it's just heavily problematical, to say the least. But I can give an example, because you know Dario's work. So on my channel, Fowler, who in KBN would be ISTP, TISE, and she was EEG'd by Dario, and she had more activity in FP1, prefrontal 1, than prefrontal 2. And that is a sort of a brain activity correlate that for all of the types, all the people that Dario has typed, all the people that resemble a type with, say, a lead judging function, they all have more activity here, if they're right-handed. And those that resemble a type with a lead perceiving function, they have more activity here. So she is I typed her as ISTP. So she resembles a type that leads with a judging function. And the EEG results show that she has more activity in FP1, so that matches. But Socionic, Victor Galenka then typed Fowler, and it was like based on an extensive interview and body language and that lot. And he typed her as SLI, which in terms of functions would be SITE. But then that contradicts the brain activity. Also, I think also if you've got, say, an MBTI, so say you've got an MBTI ISTJ. Do you remember I showed you that clip of that guy, Joyce? You know, Mr.
Yeah.
Clean, right? I would say that Mr. Clean is not aggressive. He doesn't have an aggressive romance style. He's like a caregiver. He'd do all your housework for you, Mr. Clean. But because Socionics would classify him as LSI, it would say that he has got an aggressive romance style. That doesn't make sense. ISTJs don't have an aggressive romance style. They're more caregiver. So again, that doesn't fit. And then there's things in intertype relations that don't fit. So it's a very involved argument, and I'll have to do it in future. But it's like, it's just an issue. Basically, if you're interested in looking, I think my personal opinion is that if you want to know about sensing types, read Kersey. Read the differences on artisans and guardians, and just to see how they're motivated very differently. Do that first, and then you can get some extra little things on sensing types in terms of polar functions. So, for example, with ESTP, with FI polar, and sort of like their inability to read the fine inner intentions of somebody, but they can read someone's body language very well. And these sort of finer points of FI, ENTP and ESTP are not very good at. But I would say for intuitive types, Socionics is very good, especially for telling the difference between quasi-identicals. For example, telling the difference between INFPs and INFJs. Socionics is very good at telling the difference between those twos, because it has predictions about their romance style. So, for example, that's an INFJ female is more likely to like a manly man, and an INFP female is more likely. Oh, he's smiling. I don't know if you're revealing the preference with that smile. And the INFPs are more likely to be turned off by that. And the predictions that Socionics makes about intertype relations, it plays out pretty well, doesn't it, Jonathan? What do you think?
Yes. So, by the way, I was giving a Socionics lecture in the comments if anyone's or the chat if anyone's paying attention. So
yeah, so like good. So it's like NLP. I suppose it's like NLP, Joyce, where it's like it depends how you sell it and how you talk about it. And there's certain things in NLP that work better than other things. Yeah, so you just remember. So basically, if you're looking at all the intuitive types, you're going to get good stuff in Socionics. And but again, it's the sensory introverts. You've got to be careful because they don't correspond. They don't go over. But yeah, but getting back to something useful, the subfunctions. So yeah, the reason I digressed onto this was like, so as Jonathan said, MBTI Socionics concentrates on the thorsensorics part of extroverted, the tough part of extroverted sensor, like what we got here, like combat sports, just like all this kind of stuff. That's if you read. I know you like Kersey. Have you read Please Understand Me Too, Joyce?
Yeah, I have.
Right. So you know he sort of wrote about those like being good in the military, good as warriors, good under pressure, that sort of thing. For and then in Kersey's ESTP profile, he writes about as parents they tell their children no nice guys lose, and like they want to toughen up their children. So you can see this tough aspect of extroverted sense is sort of in the Kersey Artisan profiles, especially the STPs. So that's in there. But I think it's almost offensive to say that it's just that. It's almost like SE types are just thugs who are just using. It's like there's more to it than that. There's creativity, there's adaptability in there. And so, like I said, so that's why I put the creative in there. Because like, do you think it's true, Joyce, that most actors and actresses are, say, ESFPs?
I would say maybe some of them have FI, because I notice a lot of FI users, what they tell me is that they're able to, at a snap of a finger, sometimes like change their emotional state to what they need in the role. So, but I would say maybe a lot of any type could be an actor. my FE doesn't want to offend anyone, so like, yeah.
Well, okay. If you look at the behavior of people in Hollywood, there's a lot of artisan behavior from the celebrities.
Yeah.
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 Artisan type of culture there, definitely in Hollywood.
Yeah.
And so I just wanted to comment on how this whole thing is very NT, like this. Yeah. How you devise this whole theory, how you're explaining it. I think it gives like NT vibes for anyone who wants to know what an MT vibe is.
Yeah, so like me just like being in that like club of oh, my head's getting hot. I'm gonna release my bald head and get it to cool down a little bit. There we go. Right. Yeah, so I mean, do you agree that I'm sort of not just putting this out of like we actually see this with artisans, like adapting to circumstances. There's a creative part there, and there is that assertive part there. There's more to it than just blood and guts for extroverted sensor.
Yeah, definitely. There's way more to artisans than the two-dimensional way that they're portrayed in normal descriptions. Yeah. They have a big NI, introverted intuition side of them too. Some of them can be deeply intellectual, like flow state, Taylor. Yeah. If you know him.
Yeah, to a certain extent. But you see, the thing is though, Joyce, ESTP from a socionics point of view is your jewel. And so it's like you're looking at ESTP through beer goggles in the ESTP. Heart eyes when you think about ESTP. And Socionics would predict that you are hot for ESTP.
Yeah, I have the problem with them saying that I'm hot for ESTP as well.
There you go. We saw her reaction. There we go. So that again, that's the good part of Socionics. All right. And then SI. I actually had this problem defining SI for a long time because I was trying to reconcile the different definitions from Socionics and from Dario. And I did 3 events. 3 of them were with Victor, and 2 of them were with Dario, and 2 of them were with... Oh, it's hard to say. I did 3 events with Victor and Dario on SI, but Victor and Dario were only together in the first and the third ones. And so in the first one, we had Dario going through his EEG data to actually show what is SI from his point of view. And like there was a lot of... So Joyce, have you got his book, Neuroscience of Personality, Dario's book?
Yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
okay, so you know what I'm talking... So it's like, you might have talked about this in other videos, like there's certain things where guardians become very specialist in the way they're active, like their job sort of like leaves its mark on the brain because they get very good at doing like one particular thing. Well, not just one, but you know what I mean? A few things they can really hone in and become masters of it, and you can sort of see that in the brain activity. So we did that. The second one that we did with Victor without Dario is Victor was giving the Socionics definition of SI, which is all about internal bodily harmony and comfort sensor. And I'm like, that's true. There is that to SI. So for instance, because we know guardians are very much interested in their health. And as Kersey wrote, most medical doctors are guardians. Most nurses are guardians. And as Jeff says, I love Jeff's quote about this, guardians will tell you about their medical problems. That is just true. So we can see that Socionics has captured part of the truth there. And so I was trying to put these all together. And then also, there was Carl Jung's definition of SI, which was like, and so I thought, so I've tried to integrate the 3 different definitions of SI that we have. Carl Jung, where he's talking about, you know, the subjective sensing, almost like the artistic eye, the vision of the artist, the individual idiosyncratic vision of the artist. You've got the way we understand it in MBTI, which is very much like essence of guardian, like the instinct of guardians to want to go towards authority and follow best practice, that sort of thing. And then the socionic, and then the socionics version, which is the comfort sensing stuff. So I think that's all of those 3 are parts of the puzzle that is SI. Because when we look at guardians, we see that, oh yeah, I have a question that I would like you to ask a guest, Joyce. Every time you interview a guardian, I know there's not that many on YouTube involved in typologies, ask them, what do you think of description in novels? And I think they like it. I think they like lots of sensory description in novels because to them it's very evocative. And to me, that would be an example of their imaginative subfunction of SI. And I have this thing where, like I've got here, that it might not necessarily be expressed for temperament reasons, because the arts is not a stable career from a guardian point of view. Like they'll probably want to do a proper day job and then put their artistic interests to one side, whereas an artisan is more likely to pursue a career in the arts. So I put here, many imaginative guardians are frequently uncreative as a profession because they see the arts as too risky a career. Also, the temperament goes to what has already been created, i.e. the conventional. So guardians are more likely to be derivative stroke classical. And then I've written here, I know some ISFJ resemblers who write poetry. Jamie, Natalie, they're on Twitter as that one ISFJ and that chill, and something like the chill ISFJ. I think that they've got Twitter names like that.
Yeah.
And they both write poetry.
Yeah.
And they're both guardians. So I could say, I think that's an example of the imaginative subfunction of SI. And I think that ISFP could actually use SI more to that end, just because the type is overall created, because it's an artisan. But the function is, because SI is a strong, unvalued function in ISFP. But that part of SI that's about imaginative. So any questions, Joyce, about these subfunctions of SI?
Yeah, it's really interesting. It's really
Jonathan's thinking, who's the host?
Look, what I like to say is, like, when I invite on an extroverted intuition user, what will happen is they'll talk over everyone. It's NE likes to generate all the ideas. So when you're talking about one idea, it'll lead you to another idea, and then you'll keep talking. And it's amazing. I love it. I love it so much. I feel like you really show your function stack through your theory. So you tell us about, like, the SI and how you define SI, and that's super SI to define SI that way. Like to look for the particularity of the definition of SI is very SITI of you, Ben. So it's amazing. I love it. I love all of it.
Part of it is I don't want to pretend. I don't want to pass off somebody else's work as my own. I want to give the credit to. Part of it is wanting to give credit, and another part is maybe a little bit of the SI and maybe a little bit of the 6 in terms of saying, well, it comes from Dario. Dario said this. Jung said this. Victor said this. So it's almost a little bit of that, like appeal to authority, but it's coming from a place of honesty.
Yeah.
In the way because I'm trying to be like scientific in the way I'm defining the functions. I try to do it like empirically rather than doing it in a metaphysical way, which is what socionics does.
Yeah, this is all fascinating. It's great how your extroverted intuition, your NE, is able to take ideas like from different disciplines, like so from socionics and Enneagram and Kiersey and Daryanardi. You're able to put them into like one theory in your TI framework. This is like fascinating.
Jonathan does that as well. I mean, he's got Dario's books. He knows about Kiersey temperaments, and he's steeped in Enneagram by now. He might finally let me call him an expert in about 6 months. So, are there any other features of SI that you reckon I should put? Because you know about functions, Joyce. You're qualified. Is there anything else you reckon I should put in here?
So it's a lot to read in a little sitting.
Sorry.
My introverted intuition needs to like sit on it and like process it and tell you like in a few days. Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So I do. So I was inspired by Victor Galenka's like DCNH, and originally I had a normalizing subfunction in there, but really it was just sort of repeating the assertive, but just sort of less assertive. And then I thought, hang on a minute, there isn't really a normalizing subfunction, and I thought I'll just put that to the core level. And so that's why it's down to 3 from 4. And then, okay, for NE, let's see what you think of this.
It's a bit small.
Oh, we'll zoom in.
Yeah, it is trans-contextual thinking, non-linear thinking. Yeah.
And also that's nicely opposed to I like because like Dario's got SE as immersing in the present context, and so then you've got trans-contextual thinking as the direct opposite, where it's mutually exclusive, those two things. And same with NI and SI, because if we define SI according to the temperament, so if we define SI as like the essence of guardian, as if it's a cologne or a perfume, and it's like we would say that SI is about stabilizing the situation, doing things as they've been done before, because like that's stable, that's solid. So
the tried and true.
Yeah. So SI is about stability, and NI is about development. And development and stability, again, they're opposites. And so this is sort of like a TI argument, you know, where you want your definitions to be opposites of each other. So, and then, again, world as possibilities. I think you especially see this with ENFP, actively exploring stuff. And it's like, why did you go to that country? Like, it's like you hear it when you like with ENFPs, it's like, why? It's like, because it's like their curiosity just drives them. And it's like, I think, well, oh, that's dangerous. Why did you do that? But again, the world has possibilities.
See, that's how we know you're a 6.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, so when you get like, yeah, I mean, when you get like female ENFPs, it's like, why are you going to that country? That is a dangerous country for a woman to visit. And it's like,
yeah, let's move on.
Yeah, but I'm not going to go into any detail. I've been good, Jonathan. I've not given details. Here we go. Again, world has possibilities to explore. So we've done that. So assertive, and again, it's actively taking those opportunities. Oh, I did possibilities. So I made a distinction between. I had a discussion about this with Shalina once about the difference between NE and SE when it comes to opportunities, and it's how far away it is. So, for example, an opportunity for SE is, oh, someone's left their wallet. I'll take that. That's that's an opportunity for extroverted sensing, especially ESTP. My own father will take glasses if somebody leaves glasses. Spectacle. Oh, I'll have them. Very good. Right. Whereas opportunities for NE, it's like something that's not yet concrete. It's something that could be, but not as far away as, say, NI, which is more longer term planning. Yes, also, I also talk about function pairs because they correlate to the Kersey things. So, for example, NI with TE is very different from NI with FE. Because NI with TE is about objects and plans and projects, whereas NI with FE is about relates to the diplomatic intellect of mentoring people. So it's about psychological development. And so I suppose, so from a Kersey point of view, you would be predisposed to helping people psychologically, to mentoring them.
Yeah, one of my favorite things to do.
Yeah.
And so this is wonderful. Another trait of NE is also like because they generate so many possibilities, sometimes they have a hard time picking one. So it's almost like they're all at equal weight and it's hard to choose.
Yeah. And that also, there's a correlation there with interaction style. There's certain paths. Do you know about the Linda Bowen's interaction styles, Joyce?
Yeah, I do.
Right. Yeah. Excellent. So did you ever think about the sort of like the function correlates to the interaction styles? Like, oh, I wonder which functions are involved in here to make. So what were your sort of thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's been a while. So INFJs, they have the chart the course style, right? Yeah. I would reckon that to NI sometimes. It's just, it has a certain sense of knowing, and it kind of can know how like future things will like play out. Yeah. So there are some patterns, like the only directive feeling types are NFJs, and I think that's because of the NI, and it's like they're directed for the other person's good because it's like you know how to mentor them. So there's a context to their directiveness, and the only informing thinkers are NTPs. And so we then think, okay, what's the functional reason for why NTPs are informing? Well, maybe it's because they don't know what the answer is. They don't know what direction to go in, so they're not going to force anyone to go down A when it's like, you've really got to go down path A, when it's like, well, you could do A, you could do B, you could do C, you could do D, or you could change the subject to something else.
I would say this video is a perfect example of an INTP doing a lot of informing.
Yeah, that is true.
Right. So also, so interesting patterns that they notice. So all of the NJs and STs are directive, and the NPs and SFs are informant. And so when you overlay that pattern with SJ, SP, NF, and NT, you then get to the same 16 types that Jung was describing. It's just that the split is different. So, for example, with NT and NF, the split is between NJ and NP. But with SP and SJ, the split is between ST and SF. And so people would say, oh, the Kersey temperaments are not symmetrical because you've got that cut where you cut it. One of the cuts is between NF and NT, and then you don't go SF and ST. So it's like they'll say that's an uneven cut, that's asymmetrical. We don't like asymmetricality. But the interaction styles are also asymmetrical. But when you put those together, the asymmetricalities cancel out, and you get to the same 16 types. Right. I think that looking at things from different points of view, I think that would be. I would say that's harmonizing. Anything. Here we go. Let me know, because you both know NI much better than I do, because I don't really know what it is.
No, do we?
Oh, I should have mentioned the unconscious. Darn it. Oh, yes, Joyce, because you know about NLP. I think NI is massively involved in hypnosis. What do you think?
I think NI is massively involved in NLP.
Oh, yes, and you can see it with Grindo. And what I notice is, okay, right, this is how an ISTP thinks. This is how a really smart ISTP thinks. And do you know about the meta model as well?
Can you refresh me?
You know, the meta model, those things about communication where...
Yes. Yeah.
So the kinds of things that the meta model doesn't like, it sounds like the kind of things that an ISTP doesn't like about an ENFP and the way they talk, where it's like, NLP does not like complex equivalence. And where it's NL, so ENFP is going, oh, that's just like this. No, it's not. They're completely different. And then the ISTPs get angry at the ENFPs for making the comparison. And that sort of fits any polar, where the ISTP does not like. So, like I said, so would you say that one of the tenets of the meta model is they want to keep things separate. They don't want to make odious comparisons. Each context should be separate because it's all got its specifics. And if you just look at commonalities, you lose the specifics of the context. I think that's sort of like the ethos of NLP, because a lot of it is, I see the valued functions of STP at play when I look at NLP. Like all the SE stuff, you've got to focus on the moment, all that sort of stuff. The focusing on body language, the congruency, being in the moment, that sort of stuff. Also FE valuing as well, in like mirroring other people, and like, you know, in order to gain rapport. It's like a surface kind of rapport, isn't it? By just mirroring the other, like not like literally their body language or their breathing pattern or their energy level or the keywords that they use. Very FE. So yeah, I can see the type. And also they have like the way they talk about the unconscious, it's this like great wonderful thing. You can see that they are in love with NI. That's a sort of the impression I get with NLP, that they're always banging on about unconscious competence. And it's like, yeah, you can really see it. There's an ISTP like writing a love letter to NI. And then their whole model of how Erikson worked. Oh, I've got a book for you. Have you read Erikson's book called My Voice Will Go With You?
No.
Okay, it's got all of it. It's got a lot of his teaching tales in there, and you can actually see his hypnotic patterns at play. But most of it is just really good, like use of metaphor, and it's got some funny jokes in there as well. Right.
This is fascinating. Yeah. So, audience members, this is a really good example of extroverted intuition bouncing ideas off of others to kind of gain more intuitive insight. But then the thing is, like, me and Jonathan were NI users, so we're like, yeah, Ben.
Okay.
It takes us a while. Like, we're a little slower with bouncing ideas. And there's this really interesting thing you do. Like, so Ben, you'll have a new thought, and you'll go like, and also, you'll preface a new thought with that. And I'm like, that's so NE.
Well,
Yeah.
we could change up the pace a bit. Maybe you've got a sort of like an NI question for Jonathan. I don't wish to burn you out.
No, this is great. I love all of this. Yeah.
Yeah.
NLP is very NI in the sense that like NI tends to be one of the things that it's ascribed to is seeing the patterns in its own mind and in other people's minds. And NLP is good at understanding how the mind is as a abstract concept. I don't know. I don't know if I'm explaining this well. NI being put on the spot.
Yeah, it's
That's why I
okay.
don't realize.
Yeah, NLP is like, it took me a long time to get to a point where I could talk about NLP because it's like lots of little separate techniques. And it's like, and I'm still at that point with Enneagram where I really can't talk about Enneagram in an articulate way because I don't have enough understanding. I don't feel I understand it in enough depth, Enneagram. Whereas Jonathan, very good at talking about Enneagram. And he has the knowledge of the Jungian type, so he knows how it varies, for example. So, for example, Jonathan can talk about a 6 and know how it varies by Jungian type. And we did a series in 2019, 3 events. How does the 6 vary by Kersey temperament? Because when you read the 6 descriptions, they sound too Guardian. And so we did, what does an NF6, and it was actually Janae's idea, an INFJ6. And she wanted to know, okay, what does an NF Enneagram 6 look like, an NT Enneagram 6, an SP Enneagram 6, and an SJ Enneagram 6. And so I think that's useful out there for we E6s that aren't Guardians. Also,
Yeah.
I did an also. Go on, Joyce.
Yeah, your NE's like, and also, it's amazing. I love it. And then you'll connect it to another NE, a desperate field like NLP, and you'll go like, oh, it reminds me of this, and it's amazing.
Yeah, but I mean, yeah, go on.
Oh yeah. So I want to add a bit to NI. So you wrote archetypes. So yeah, NI is associated with archetypes because I kind of see NI as seeing the cycles of things. It can see the broader cycle of how things will play themselves out. So it's predictive in that sense. Everything has an archetype. Archetype is a cool way of saying like broad pattern. And if you understand that broad pattern, that underlying meaning, then you can infer like how it's going to play out in the future. So because like you told me, Ben, NI in socionics is called time. And so it's able to know how patterns play out in time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I initially changed that to, I was going to call it intuition of change. But then I realized Victor misunderstood me, but it was in a way that was legitimate, because change could also mean like, A to B, like sudden changes, but it actually meant development, like gradual changes over time. So that's why I personally call it, as a shorthand, intuition of development. And one of the ways, like I said, if you see, because usually NI is paired with another function, and then you can sort of see it like I said, when you've got NI with FE, and probably a bit of FI in there as well, but basically NI in the context of NF, the way NFs use NI, guiding people, seeing how things. So maybe you could talk. How do you use NI, Joyce?
This is a very on the spot, not my natural element.
Yeah, but this is even.
I will try.
I thought you'd be talking about this all the while.
Definitely. Yeah. And so you mentioned developing as NI, and I do see that to be the case. Let's go back to NLP and about how, NI is good at knowing how your mind's wired and basically understanding the development of the patterns in your mind. It's basically, NI has an innate understanding of development of patterns, no matter where they are. So it's understanding how things lead up to certain things. So it's almost like it's able to know the ripple effect that leads to things. So acutely aware, like it does a lot of background processing, but it's able to figure out the ripple effects that lead to eventualities. So it's understanding that everything you see is a symptom of something that has been developing all along. So it's kind of like figuring out what was there all along, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and you can see that with the NTJs. So Kersey would say that INTJ, I call it NITX, is predisposed to the arranger role. And the arranger role is the idea of somebody who's looking at a plan and thinking about how it can go wrong, and like the contingency plans, where it's like, well, if A happens, then we've got to do B. And then if C happens, then we've got to do D. And it's like thinking ahead. It's almost like more negativist, kind of like just thinking about what can go wrong and a range of contingencies. And that fits the type, which tends to be a bit critical. INTJ tends to be a bit critical. Find the holes in things. And they can also have very strong, and the way they use TI tends to be negative in that they're very good at finding the holes in arguments, INTJs.
Yeah. Interesting, fascinating. And so, Jonathan, do you have anything to add to the NI section?
Well, personally, I'm not much of an artist. But you see art.
Yeah, well, I mean, you have writing potential, though, Jonathan.
Oh yes, I'm an excellent writer, but still not much of an artist. And relates to submissive aspect of NI and romance tells. I take personal offence to that, but yeah, it's all right. Could use work.
Okay. Well, I'm happy to develop it. The main thing is to get input from people who use the function.
The thing with NI is it's always on if you're an INFJ or an INTJ. So it's constantly, it's really hard to describe. That's another trait of NI. Like, I associate intuition in general with abstraction, abstract thinking, perhaps imagination as well, subconscious reasoning, all these things. It's all broader than just the normal definition of intuition. It's more like going into the mechanics of intuition and philosophical thinking and so on. I wouldn't necessarily associate it with faith, like any type of faith. It's more like it really has a perceiving function. It really has like seeing things in a particular way, viewing the world in a way that other people don't. Like if I remember hearing somewhere that I don't know, it could have been Ben told me this, could be someone else, that like an SE type would be very, or can be very aware of their immediate environment. Like they might notice the details of a tree, for example, where an NI type wouldn't notice it, whereas a more adult NI type would be suddenly quite aware of like the details of a tree and stuff, and they'll notice these things. They'll notice things that they never noticed before, even though they've always been there. Whereas like someone with weak NI or like an STP that's developed their NI, they'll suddenly start thinking in more abstract concepts as they get older. So yeah, that's how I'm trying to badly describe things. Like
Joyce, you could like take a clip of this and just that begin at the start, like the first 30 seconds, the body language of Jonathan, like all the things he was doing with his hands, like showing he was going into an NI state, like all of those gestures, brilliant gestures of
yeah.
That was all good because that was like legitimate. It wasn't done for effect. You notice these things when you're doing events with each other for about 6 years.
Absolutely. There's also a way that NI is put that I enjoy too. It's the elephant metaphor. So it's 5 blind men and the elephant.
Yeah.
It's also in Darian Arty's book where, you have one man feeling different parts of the elephant. Like each man is noticing like the ear, the other man has the tail, the other man is riding the elephant. And so you all have a feel of the concept. And the more feelers you get on that concept, the more like almost whole it becomes, but slowly. Like it's kind of like that. Yeah.
I think that might be intuition in general.
Yeah, it is. I agree.
Yeah. Because something that Vanderhoek wrote about, you can have an insight into relation of things. There's a slight, I do notice there's a slight bias in Vanderhoek. It's like he's INTP. Like, he described himself as an introverted thinking type with auxiliary intuition. So that sometimes I can see maybe a bias towards NE in him. But what about these ones? Okay, go on. Sorry.
Oh yeah, it's also in Dario Nardi's book, The Elephant. There are other ways that NI is put too. It's kind of like a glass, and then it's defrosting. So the glass is defrosting, and when it defrosts, you see the image clearly through it. So that's how it kind of feels like too. And there's also it's been put like it's a pond, and basically you're waiting for the ripples to calm down, so the water is completely clear, and you can see through it, and you can kind of tell. If that makes any sense. It's almost like it's a settling of intuition.
Kind of.
That doesn't do much for me. It was a nice image, but like the pond, like AI is really hard for me to do, because it's like I describe it as the fish that doesn't know its wet function. Like I swim in it, but I don't even know I'm wet with NI. I think I might encounter it as something that leads my thoughts in a certain direction before I've thought it. Might be the way I experience it.
Yeah. As worth pointing out that the INTPs, their NI is just as strong as an INFJ or an INTJ. It's just less preferred. They prefer the NE. So INTPs and INFPs, they still have very strong NI, but it's almost like it's more unconscious for them than it is for us. Even though we can barely describe it ourselves.
Yeah, that's why I call it the fish's water. Like the fish doesn't know it's wet. The INTP fish doesn't. The INTP and INFP fishes don't know they're wet with NI. And it's like, for example, the equivalent would be INFJs don't know they're wet with FI.
Yeah, that's cool.
So, is it naughty of me to show you TE because like you probably both don't like TE? So
go ahead.
Are these all the things that you don't like about TE?
Except theoretical. Why is it theoretical? I would say that like things with theory of evolution, scientific and stuff, that starts off as introverted thinking and usually with intuition, and then TI comes along and sees it and just uses it.
The thing is, though, the theory of evolution, though, it's like the way Darwin approached it. Like you could argue that there's a lot of empirical stuff that's coming from the theory of evolution. Like there's a huge evidence base for it, and I think in science where your initial hypothesis, you probably got some subjective factor going on in there, but like science really tries to be objective with like, and even like with double-blind trials and stuff, like they're really trying to eliminate the subjective factor.
Well, isn't TI trying to do that as well in its own way?
Yeah, it depends, because like there's really good TI that most TI thinks it is, but isn't. Like, you know, like when it's really solid reasoning that you can't, and I'm not going to give examples because it would be a digression, but you know what I mean? Not all thinking reaches that level of the super duper TI that cannot be argued with and is absolute truth. Most TI is just speculative stuff that's internally consistent.
Yeah, I would say that extroverted thinking is just taking what introverted thinking has created and trying to apply it. So it's like almost like it's lazy. It's like extroverted thinking is hardworking on the outside, but it's kind of lazy on the inside because it's just taking what's there and running.
There's a bit of that. I think there's a bit of that.
So kind of like how FE is more aware of what other people's emotions are, and less aware of their own emotions. So it's like, whereas FI, it almost wants to reinvent the wheel from an FJ's point of view, or reinvent the emotional wheel. And I think TI is kind of the same from a TJ point of view. So it's like, I agree with the first part in terms of the accepted laws.
Yeah, it's like,
I'd say the accepted laws, accepted scientific laws, perhaps.
Yeah, I can give you an example, like, say, Newtonian physics. Like, at the time, Kant thought it was like, this is absolutely true. But now we know, well, mostly true for, say, Newtonian physics, because there's certain situations where it doesn't work. But it's like, what is your accept? Because there's like, you can look back in historical eras where, if you would like to interview the people about like their extroverted thinking, it was like, what was the thinking conventional to them at that time? The certain things that they believed in, that they accepted as just the way things were. Like some of the Greeks thought that the blood, they thought the brain was to cool the blood and the intelligence was in the heart.
Wait, were you implying that Kant was a TJ type?
No, absolutely not. I'm just saying that.
Thank God.
Absolutely not. He's like INTP. He is the god of INTPs. Yeah. He even had that. He would even like, he had some inferior FE going along. Like he'd want to socialize in the afternoon for about 3 hours and then tell him to bugger off so he could go and do some thinking. Just picking up the pace, getting up. Did I do TI? No, I didn't do TI, but I'll just put that down there.
You've been doing a lot of TI for this entire video.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, it's a bit, like I said, you can get assertive, like you get a real structure out there. I mean, you can sort of see that, and then imaginative, speculative thought experiment. I think socionics concentrates too much on TI as rigid structure, and that's why it gets it mixed up with the behavior of SJs. And then again, integration of theories, you could say I do that. And then the subjective, like again, thought experiments, yeah. If you're plotting a novel, you're plotting things out, and like, what would they do in this situation? And that sort of thing. Subjective based thinking. And I have all my introverted definitions as subjective and all my extroverted definitions as empirical, and that matches Jung. Whereas socionics doesn't properly understand vertness. Now you go. 2 functions you know more about than I do. What about this? Where am I going wrong?
I would say that FE is more like awareness of group morality and group feelings rather than being it. Like, I think.
Right. Okay.
If I'm going
I'll write that down.
It's almost like
taking notes.
It's like the phrase "when in Rome, do as the Romans do." It's like,
right.
You're going in there and you're sort of aware of it, but you're not necessarily. I think there's a stereotype of FE being very conformist.
Yeah.
And I actually think that all the types can be conformist if they like find their people. Like FI types can be very conformist when it comes to values, FI values that they share with another group, for example.
Yeah.
I do think that FI kind of wants to be the new FE, and like wants to be the new TE. So I'd say it's more like awareness.
Yep.
Of the group morality and group feelings and the normal values and managing them and being able to like move in and out, move with them. Maybe FE leads more drawn to it than FE auxiliary, but yeah. And yes, emotion reading.
Do you agree with that, Joyce? What Jonathan said? That I should. I'll put awareness in there.
I would say it's like using emotional information in decision making, but it's more about the group emotional information and using it in decision making.
It's almost like FE is just as empirical as TE. It's just that they're looking at different kinds of facts.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. All of the extroverted functions are like empirical.
Yes. I'm glad we agreed about that.
Yeah.
Right, I'm just gonna.
But I like to say empirical as opposed to objective, because all the functions are objective. A lot of people use the term objective and empirical as if they're the same thing, but really, I like to distinguish the two.
Yeah, I've got 3 definitions of objective that people use, like that, like, if someone's being impartial, they'll sort of say, you've got to be objective in this situation. You need to look at things with a cool head, that kind of way. And then there's objective as in really, 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 really true, and you don't need to observe it. Like 2 + 2 = 4. That's that kind of objective. And then the third kind of objective is like what Jung meant by looking at objects and stuff. But okay, that just means empirical. So empirical is what names the actual thing that Carl Jung was described on.
Mm-hmm.
Also, I wrote in a note that, well, when it comes to sound, there's not really an object, but there is an empirical thing there, like a vibration. So yeah. Anything I should add to these subfunctions? Any changes that I should make?
Probably, but I can't think of them right now.
Okay. FI then.
Oh, I would put empathy with FE. But
this is where we have a different versions of
there
FE.
are different types of empathy. Like
yeah.
Cognitive empathy is a bit more FE.
Yeah, I'd like.
Catherine has like 7 different types of empathy, actually. So
that'd be good to do an event on that.
Yeah.
So FI is empathic in the sense. Okay, people describe empathy as putting yourself in another person's shoes. FI and FE both do that, but they do that in a different way, and there's a bit of a clash there. So FI kind of puts themselves on the other person's shoes, like they're emphasizing themselves. How would I feel in that situation? Whereas FE is a bit more put yourself in the other person's shoes, emphasizing the other self, almost like changing a bit.
But I would say that FI has the ability. So when I'm writing a character, when I'm writing this play, I'm writing a female character that's Christian, and she's like soliloquizing, and she's very upset. My aim was to put myself inside the center of her character, not as myself, but as her.
Exactly. That's more F. That's a bit
so
more.
You're saying that's FE?
I'd say that's more FE than FI.
So why is it that the FI people tend to be good at that, though?
Because they get really well. They're still using FE. They're just coming from FI first. I would say if you listen to George R. Martin in interviews, I think he's an FI user. He says that all the characters in his books, Game of Thrones, they're all him. They're all versions of him, no matter what they are. Like, because he's trying to speak to this kind of what he sees as sort of universal humanity, common shared humanity. So he started with himself. I think Freud was in FI type, and he kind of had a bit of that as well. Like he was trying to develop a universal theory of psychology, starting with himself and his own experience and dreams. So it's like the FI types kind of a real depth of feeling.
Yeah,
they can imagine themselves in all these different kind of situations with different identities and so on. But there's still a sense of they're starting with themselves and then going to the other person, whereas with the FJs, it's like they're noticing the other person first. And then in that, so FE is, in a way, FE by itself can be sort of shallow, emotionally shallow. You'll see that more with the FI polar types, like the ESTP and ENT.
Yeah, that's the thing. They're bad at doing that thing of putting themselves in somebody else's shoes as that person, not as themselves in that.
But they are quite good at reading people and manipulating.
Yeah, I think. So if you look at the way Kersey describes like NFs, and he talks about introjection, I think FE is very good at introjecting the emotions of somebody. But when you've got this this is highly speculative, isn't it? When you're talking about is it FE or FI when you're imagining what's going on inside somebody's head in terms of feeling states.
Well, there's also intuition there as well.
Yes.
But,
yeah, fascinating thoughts. I agree with both of you. I'll say one of the differentiations you can make between FI and FE empathy is FE is synchronous and FI is asynchronous. So FI it happens in its own time. So it's almost like it's not really empathizing for that moment in time, but it's almost like it's time traveling. A lot of FI users will tell me that their empathy exists outside of the moment, almost, if that makes sense.
Right. There's a dichotomy in socionics that's I'll let you get in a moment, Jonathan. I just want to say this thing like where socionics has this idea that FI and TI are static, so it's like a configuration, like say a logical configuration or an ethical configuration, and TE and FE are more dynamic. It's more related to the situation.
Yes, I agree.
So,
FE is generally more contextual, and FI is asynchronous. Yeah.
So those FI types that told you that were the INFPs specifically, or all FI types? Joyce.
Oh, for the asynchronous and synchronous?
Well, you said the FI types associate empathy with time. I'm just wondering if those were the all FI types, or if they were just like the INFPs and stuff. Because associating FI with time, that sounds a bit like a combination of FI and NI to me.
Yeah, so I guess I'm not describing this or doing it justice. I always feel like I'm describing like 5% of what I actually mean. So
I get
with
that.
Yeah, you feel me, Jonathan. You're the same way. Solidarity. Yeah. And so with asynchronicity, it's almost like it exists in a time, in a space without time itself. FI, a lot of FI people, they'll describe it like they store FI impressions over time. And so when a situation comes, they're comparing it to like, I see it as all introverted functions store stuff. So FI stores emotional impressions over time. And so when it sees an event happening, it's applying all of those emotional impressions that it's had before to this situation. Yeah. Whereas FE's just seeing the current event for the current event's emotional implications. Yeah.
Yes, but there's also that part of FE that has to do with an attentiveness to sort of like the social norms, and like what are good manners, and like those things might something that's more permanent, like the accepted thing, the done thing. But generally, I definitely agree that the memory and past experience is a big part of the subjective factor of something. Like you might have a favorite song because it reminds you of you maybe met somebody when you heard that song or something. Or so yeah, these are my scores from Dario's keys-to-cognition.com. And actually no, this is from his book, 8 Keys to Self-Leadership. And you can see that my NT functions are highest, but I've got that outlier with FI there. With that FI score, but usually the NT functions are quite high. So there's that part of it. Oh, something happened with Jonathan. So these are the contents of Van der Hoop's book. And so you can see like a big part of it is psychiatry of the type, and then it gets so anyway. So what I wanted to show you, like he goes INTP. Look how INTP he goes, Joyce, with like his rings graphic. Like he really elaborates on it.
This is very INTP.
Yeah, he's gone full INTP there. And so what I've got though is I'll do the graphic for you and Jonathan. I think that's it. So the model V of so the idea being, so Joyce, do you think you're good at all these NF functions?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah, yeah, it makes sense. And I got this, and I thought carefully about having the names of the positions be colorful and easily understandable. And I wanted it to be easy to understand for an MBTI person. So that's why I left in dominant, auxiliary, tertiary, and inferior, and just added a little bit of color. And then, so for example, the idea of backseat driver, that like you're aware of the NE things, you just ignore it. And it's like, I try to ignore it, Ben. But sometimes I'm confronted with the NE. But I sometimes like the NE, right? Without putting words into your mouth. And then this idea that it's the modest servant. It's like and I took this thing of, now this might seem like a silly question, but because I changed the name of this column to wheelhouse, is it clear what I mean by calling it wheelhouse?
Oh, could you explain?
Well, that's the thing, because there's an expression out there called "in your wheelhouse."
Oh.
And so I was sort of thinking, like, will people understand what that means when I say that these are the wheelhouse functions?
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's like when you're in this area, you feel like you're in your wheelhouse. Mm-hmm. You're in your comfort zone, your area of expertise. So what about you, Jonathan? What about this name wheelhouse for this column?
Yeah, sure. It doesn't matter what. It doesn't matter what you call it. Like, no matter what names people come up with, it always leads to some level of confusion, regardless of the typology.
Well, I could get extra any. I could call this banana. I could call this apple. I could call this toffee.
Go for it.
But you know, because. Okay, I'll ask you, Jonathan. Do you think you're good at all these NF functions?
Yes, and then he is definitely the worst. But
I'd agree with Jonathan. Yeah.
I say my SI is better than my TE and SE, but then I just feel kind of lazy. I like SE more than SI, but I do SI more easily than SE.
Yeah. Oh yes, I have a theory that for you, because you are a very introverted INFJ, I have a theory that you might. I think I wrote it down here that that was it. An extreme introvert is likely to show better use of counter club default functions, position 5 and 7, than a moderate introvert. Conversely, a moderate introvert is likely to show better use of club situational functions, which for an introvert or extroverted than an extreme introvert. You know, in other words, a more outgoing INFJ is likely to have better FE and NE than, say, a more introverted INFJ. And a more introverted INFJ is more likely to have better TI and SI because they're in that state of introversion more often.
Yeah. Also, I should say I've been raised. My parents are both ISJs, so that may have impacted my SI as well. Yeah, I do find like overly detailed stories with a lot of SI to be a bit much. I don't mind them in doses. Well, I'd say I like something like John Grisham, who I think is in like an STJ, maybe an ESTJ, whatever. I like his stuff more than George R. R. Martin, who's also SI type. Could be INFP or ISTJ, one or the other. But the difference is George R. R. Martin's books, they're part of a long series. So you have to like read the whole thing, and he gets so much SI, and he gets more and more SI as he goes on. Whereas like a John Grisham book is like more episodic. So it's like just read it, story's done, you can just put it down.
So, Jonathan, have you done that test that I've suggested, like asking Guardians what to think of do they love the sensory description?
I have not done that test, no. I'll take your word for it.
Yeah.
Then again, I've only read one John Grisham book, so I don't know what I'm talking about.
Right.
I've read a couple of Tom Clancy, he's ESTJs, probably, so I'm just throwing out names now.
So what do you think of the idea of like dividing it in terms of your default realm of operation? And I had sort of like different names for this, like default field of consciousness, default realm of operation. Like, so if does that make sense? Is that understandable?
It makes sense.
Right.
It's very NE of you to see what parts make sense and don't while you're talking to us and trying to figure it out there. Yeah.
Because I want people to understand vertness properly. Like, as in, like, how Jung originally meant it to be understood, except using better words. like, you know what I mean? Don't use the word objective, use the word empirical. And so, for example, here, it's subjective, it's internal. And then even with SI is not as internal as the other introverted functions. However, certain subfunctions of SI, like the imaginative part, like, for instance, when Guardians are reading those George R.R. Martin novels, and when they are imagining what is described, their own sort of subjective flavor, the things that they've already experienced really colours how they experience it. And I suppose the only way to sort of get towards that would be to have some Guardians discuss what they got out of each of the descriptions, to sort of like get an idea into what their sensory imagination's like. And I would also say the internal bodily harmony, again, internal. But I also think the other ones are internally focused as well. Because it's sensing. Generally, you are sensing things outside of yourself. It's got a subjective filter on it, but it's still outside of yourself. But so that's why I wanted to put that note in there. And do you think it's fair to say, for the introverted type, the default realm of operation is introverted, meaning that the subjective reaction to the stimulus is more important than the stimulus itself?
Mm-hmm. Fascinating. What are your thoughts, Jonathan?
See, I have. Bear in mind, I've been doing this with Ben for years, so I'm just used to. So I was busy, answering comments, so I didn't hear that.
I'll ask it on her behalf then, Jonathan. What do you think, Jonathan, about all this Vertness stuff? Does it make sense?
It probably does, yes.
Oh, it probably does. Oh, this is the big J himself. Like, where is he going wrong?
Interesting number of those everyone's actually introverted thinks, feels, and acts in the way that's good. He's going wrong because he's just speaking in INTP's talk.
So, do you think that Carl Jung did a good job of writing a book that looked like it was written by an INTP?
Evidently,
yeah.
Yeah, it makes sense.
And also, I see it as dynamic as well. So, and I give an example of Van der Hoop. I quote Van der Hoop. I can actually quote Van der Hoop because he died in 1950, so that means 70 years since he died, so he's out of copyright, Van der Hoop. Because Tick, the Imperator Knight, the historian guy, he mentioned George Orwell, and he died in about 1950-51, didn't he, Jonathan? And so he's because he wanted to know if something from George Orwell was out of copyright.
Mm-hmm.
Unless it's Disney or something, yeah. If it's Disney, then it doesn't matter.
Yeah, but they did extend that. Yeah, they got that extension. I saw some videos on that. But Mickey Mouse, though, in a year or two, the original Mickey Mouse, without that comes in open, and in about the next 10 or 15 years, Batman and Superman become available.
Well, supposedly they'll come available.
Yeah.
We'll see what the studios have to say about that.
Yeah. So Van der Hoop wrote about. He said he took up riding a horse. I've got the full quote. I'll give you the full quote from Van der Hoop when he talks about riding a horse again, and he talks about different. He did it whilst he was investigating this book. And what page is it? Page 24. And he writes about how different states would be of varying uses. So here we go. At the time when I was investigating the instinctive sphere, I took up riding again after a long interval. And it taught me a lot about a state of mind in which more complicated mental activity must be cut out. If I had begun to think too much about it, I should certainly have been in danger of being thrown. If I had given way to feeling, I should have perhaps become anxious or too self-confident, which would have been no more helpful, nor would intuition have got me very far. Yet I was conscious of being intensely active, my attention being riveted on the totality of my sense experience and my reactions to it. This mental activity, bound up as it unquestionably is with emotion, is very difficult to describe. So that would be an example of, you've got an introvert like Vanderhoop, situationally extroverting because the situation calls for it. And so that's why I got this idea that introvert situationally extrovert and extrovert situationally introvert. Usually I would say when they reflect on something. And I've given some examples on, but I wasn't able to add it to the graphic. Not enough space to add it. So yeah, I mean, I want people to understand vertness. If they understand vertness, then that helps some people to understand the functions. Like, say the difference between FE and FI. And see, it's like, because then it's like, I think it helps people get to an understanding of the functions that is closer to Jung. The only difference is with like our present definitions of SE and SI go beyond what can be deduced from a concept of, say, so for example, if you were to teach somebody, if you were taught to somebody and they understood the concept of sensing, and then you were to teach them and they understood the concept of extroverted and introverted, and then you were to ask them, well, what does SE and SI mean? They would actually end up with an answer that's different from our present understanding, because our definition of SE is not just empirical sensing. It's not just like, say, a high sensory acuity to the actual physical properties of objects and sounds. It's more than that, because we went through that earlier on. There's things that have come in from the temperament, and that's why Vanderhoop said there's an instinct going on here. So where was that? Oh, it's up here somewhere. Right, here we go. Is that Vanderhoop? Ah, perception. Ah, I thought this was funny. What about this, Jonathan?
I don't know. I've seen quite a lot of Scottish extroverts.
Yeah, especially in Glasgow. Yeah, but like, this is just an example of the kind of things how detailed his index is, which is one of the things that Dario could get better at. I've not seen one of his books with an index.
If you're watching Dario.
Perception. Here's the little things that Vanderhoop did, like some nice little comments here. And this goes towards one of the little errors in MBTI and Jung. Like this, like Vanderhoop being an INTP himself, it's like he's got to think differently from Jung. It's like we've always got to think differently. So in case someone's watching this on a smaller device, I'll read it out. Because I had begun to regard emotion as an expression of instinct, I was no longer able to accept Jung's formulation of the function of perception. Jung goes so far as to regard sensation and perception as identical, but perception, in my opinion, is more related to thought, since by it, truth is tested. And also, I've got a couple of books on cognitive psychology. Object recognition, I think, is related to thought. I think it's non-verted thinking. When you're looking at these letters and you're recognizing and understanding the words, that's more than just sensing. You're using thought recognition within the realm of the senses. So here we go. Sensation is a much simpler and more passive mental process in which it is much more difficult to define the units of experience. So, for example, say you're looking at something and you don't know what you're looking at whatsoever. That would be the realm of instinct and sensor. But as soon as you know what you're looking at, your recognition colors what you're seeing. It's like, you know, when they do those things, have you ever had those, have you ever listened to the radio where they've had like a competition and they play a weird sound and it's a guess what that sound is competition, or they show an object really close in and you've got to try and guess what it is. And if you think about what your experience of that object is like or sound before you know what it is, and then after you know what it is, then you could say that you could say it crosses the boundary from the purely instinctual, the purely sensory, and then it becomes cognitive as soon as you recognize it. You know, and then you get a different perception of it because perception is related to thought. Then it's part of cognitive psychology. Here we go. Vanderhook being very INTP here. Receptivity and reaction are here still closely related. If, however, sensation and reaction are regarded as a whole, there is an exact correspondence with those manifestations which many biologists describe as instinctive, and which even psychologists like McDougall regard as manifestations of instinct. And then I've got bits here. Perceptions are, however, mental contents of far greater differentiation than the field of sensation, which we have in mind. Philosophers in their ideas about sensation are too apt to start from the point of view of perception, which is quite a different process. Perception is a circumscribed cognitive process. That's how cognitive psychology thinks of it. And this limited conception has been transferred to sensation. Then Jung goes so far. What we've got there. This is my own thoughts on. I once did a video saying that I don't think thinking and feeling are opposites. I think they're only sometimes opposed. So this is there's a little bit from Vanderhoop, and then I'll put my own interpretation in. So feeling types, on the other hand, do not like the impersonal objectivity of which thinking aims, and which seems to them cold and unreal. Do you agree with that?
I would say yeah for some feelers.
Yeah. But it's not about the actual thinking that's opposite. It's the impersonal objectivity.
Yeah.
Because I think you can use thinking and feeling at the same time.
Yeah. What makes them different is the impersonal versus the personal.
Yes.
Yeah.
And when I saw that from Van, I thought, that is gold. He's hit it on the head. He's nailed it. And so, because in Kersey, there is no thinking versus feeling. Yes, Jonathan?
So just to clarify, you're talking about the FE DOMs, not necessarily like I say, the INFJ is probably the most okay with the impersonal of all the feeling types.
Right.
That's what I find anyway. Or maybe I'm just talking myself. Maybe I'm just a super objective INFJ.
Yeah, you got to be right. You got that E1 there. But it's like, because from the point of view of... the individual feeling type elaborates facts and possibilities according to his own subjective attitude, and anything outside that sphere has little value for him. So I think this helps to explain why. I also think from a CBT, do you know about? I think you probably do know about this, Joyce, because it's related to NLP. Do you know about CBT?
Yeah, I use CBT in my coaching. Yeah.
Right. So, what do you think that CBT sort of shows us that the relationship between thinking and feeling is more complicated than what MBTI would have us believe?
Yeah, in certain ways, yeah.
It's not a case of just thinking versus feeling.
I think another way I would think about it is that feeling types love objectivity and facts and stuff when it supports their emotions, when it supports their feeling. Like obviously, you see as with stereotype would be INFPs who love finding facts that supports their position and doesn't like facts that contradict their position, that sort of thing. Or NFP in general. Yeah, it's just stereotyping, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that. So I would say that in certain situations, you can have like thinking opposed to feeling, like that example you gave of like if it's a hot button issue for a particular INFP. But I can also see an INFP being interested in philosophy, such as Monica on the channel, and where it's like, and I would say in a lot of instances, thinking and feeling are not opposed to each other. Maybe it's a sixth thing because the sixth is ambivalent and might be something to do with my tri-type.
I find
Copyright Catherine Father.
I've definitely seen INFPs who are into philosophy, but they're more likely to adopt a particular philosophical school of thought or stance or whatever, and then see everything through the lens of that philosophy. And ENFPs as well, and they could talk about other philosophical types, but they've got a bit more favourite. I've seen ENFP philosophers, like even philosophy professors who like know a whole lot about philosophy, but they can't really defend they're not comfortable defending their positions logically, syntactologically. So yeah, there's a complex relationship with the FPs in philosophy because they can do it really well, but there's certain particular weak points.
Yeah.
In how they do it. So
yeah, it's such a broad subject as well, philosophy.
Yeah.
Because it's like all the sciences were sort of like put together.
Yeah. I would say though that thinking if you are opposites in the sense that you can't really do both at the same time in your own mind. Like if you're trying to, or it's harder to do thinking if you want to say it in your own mind. If you're like using FI and TI, for example, at the same time, that can be very difficult because TI wants to cut the emotions out, whereas the FI wants to support. But when they're in, when they're in sync,
I think you can do it in sync. Like if you're putting yourself in the center of a character, and you've got the thought process. So, for instance, when I'm writing a character that's very upset, and you've got the thought process of that character, so it's like that's introverted thinking, but it's all informed by the introverted feeling, and it's that relationship between feeling and thinking that CBT captures, and that the 6 does a lot. That ambivalence.
Well, are you using both at the exact same time, or are you using one and then switching to the other, like in a moment?
Ooh, it depends. I mean, sometimes you switch on, but then there's other times when you're actually channeling the character and what the character is thinking, because the character's really upset, and then it's the thoughts are coming from the fact that they're upset. I mean, even yourself, when you found yourself in a particular state, like say when you're really angry, and you can maybe see in hindsight that you thought those things because you were angry. It was in the heat of the moment or the heat of passion or whatever. And so I think sometimes they can inform each other. And because Joyce, you've seen, because you'd know this, Joyce, like, you know, the CBT things where it gets people to write down what were you thinking when you felt that emotion and all these sorts of things. And it's like 50 years of study to show this complex relationship between how your feelings change your thinking and your thinking changes your feelings.
Definitely. Yeah. There's a holistic relationship between these two things. Yeah.
And then is this, oh, here we go. A little bit something that you'd like, a little bit of intuition.
It's very small.
Very small. I can make it a little bit bigger. You got any idea how much effort it took me to write that out in block capital in a neat way? And now I switched to the typewriter.
Okay. Why did you have to write it out like that though?
But I wanted to show it to people. I wanted to do notes for myself because I was thinking of writing a functions book.
Okay.
And it's taken about 5 years to do all the preparation, given how much detail I go into. And there's so much in Vanderhoop and Dibley. What about that? Intuition is not felt as perception, nor as a group of perceptions, but as an insight into the significance of the whole of an experience.
Yeah, that's great.
Did you reckon Vanderhoop was INTP, Jonathan, by the way he's writing this?
Oh, yes. If he's anything like you, what do you think he is?
Yeah. I like how Jonathan's able to know what resembles you, Ben. He pays a lot of attention to you.
Well, known him for a few years now. So.
Yeah.
So, Joyce, I have to ask this question. How much time do you have? Because based on experience, I have to ask that question.
I have 15 minutes until I have a coaching client that I have to
Oh, flipping it. That's a hard limit. Right, okay. So here's a bit on flipping it. I got it. The hard limit on right, okay, we'll stick. Right. I'll give you a bit of that, and then I'll give you a bit of... Actually, I'll give you a little bit of Dibley first.
We'll say 10 minutes, actually, because Ben I want to talk about afterwards, usually.
Right, okay. I'll give you a little bit of Dibley. So this is this guy. He's like the Dario Nardi in the 1920s. Sort of. And so again, instincts, I'll just pick out little bits. I think this is SE. I think this is really SE, this bit. By quite separate instincts, he may turn a deaf ear to reason and intuition and act in some ill-considered but immediately efficient fashion. Alternatively, the same process may take place in a more sudden and unexpected manner when an individual, before his reason has time to work or his intuition to produce intelligible results, may have been moved to summary action more promptly still by unconscious instinct. I hope it will be back. So, do you think that sounds like SE?
The tactile intellect?
Yeah, this bit here in orange. The orange, yeah. I think that's SE. Yeah. And he read, and he fanboyed Jung in this book as well. Like, he was going, oh, Jung, he really defined intuition in the right way. That sort of thing. Again, this bit here, peculiar unconscious elements of instinct. Optic thalamus is the supreme center for instinctive reactions. Many varieties, and then different kinds of instinct, because we've not got a lot of time. Here we go. And then making a distinguishing between instinct and habit. It is mixed up with unconscious reflex and with conscious emotion. But we need to know nothing about the mental. Again, it's all complex. It's all very like intertwined and nuanced and stuff. And we're up against the hard limit and instinctive behavior. Okay, extra stuff there. Wait, where's the bit that I wanted to show before? I wanted to concentrate on. Yes. So when he talked about the thalamus, I've got this to show you. This is from a proper. Now, this is from what looks like a simple book, but it's written by a proper cognitive psychologist, Angus Gellatley. He's Scottish. He's in a Scottish. It'd be great to get him into an event with Dario, because he edited this book, this big cog-sci book for the Open University. Yeah, Angus Gellatley, and so he did that book in about the late 90s. But I think this is fascinating. The idea that somebody who is cut off from their emotions has a very hard time making decisions. Fascinating. Is that? I'll just read that. The limbic system has strong connections with the frontal lobes. When these connections are damaged, people may show surprising little intellectual impairment, yet their personal, social, and professional lives fall apart. The problem lies in their decision making. Faced with a problem requiring a decision, they analyze and evaluate all the alternatives. You also could argue they get a bit ENTP-ish, yeah. Guys, all the at excessive length, and they finally make their choice for irrelevant reasons. Take the example of a patient asked on which date to see his doctor. So you might think, Ben, this looks like an NTP. Do you prefer this Friday or the next? Well, that depends. But then again, I might be busy, and then like Friday ones I happen to. Of course, it would be easier if I was in town this Friday, but I suppose it's snowing again. I won't know. And it's like, because they've not got the feeling there. And then we got here, they can talk rationally, distinguish what is socially acceptable or not, but they often do not seem to feel their own emotional assessments at a core level. They might even remark that although they know what they should be feeling, they do not consciously have the feelings.
Well, it says gut level, not core level. It's not. Is this really about emotions, or is it about instinct, which is a bit? I
think this is about like limbic emotions. I think this is like, as Van der Hoop, and like I said, this is a little bit of a correlate to why Van der Hoop would say emotions are separate from feelings, and feelings are a lot more complicated. So, for example, he distinguishes between anger and indignation. And he gives the example that you could bump into someone, have an initial reaction of anger that you might see as an elderly person or a small child, and that sort of like colors the feelings that you have about it. And so he thinks that if you've got he thinks that a hallmark of feeling is a mixture of emotions. And maybe this is like the structure of the brain, where we've got this older part of the brain that's like the dog, and you've got like these like the emotions that a dog has, and then you've got these higher feelings in the brain, like sort of attached to like values and ethics and right and wrong, and that's very different from like your core emotions. And so here's an example. And so remember, Dibley said he thought that instinct was in the thalamus. He said the seat of instinct was the optic thalamus. And here we have the human forebrain contains a large number of important structures. The thalamus is a kind of communication center which receives input, sensory, eyes, ears, skin, and other sense organs. It also modulates activity in the cortex as a whole. The hypothalamus is a small but very, and then the 4 Fs. So you've got, so right there is saying that you've got your emotion and your sensory input goes to the thalamus first.
Feeling, fighting, fleeing, and what?
And fornication. He cleaned it up. I like how they put. Hey, I think it's clever what he's done there. He changed flight to fleeing, because not all animals have wings.
Okay.
Because they used to say fight or flight, didn't they?
Flight still sounds better.
Yeah, but fleeing. Yeah, but you know, I don't see many deer flying.
Oh, they would have had Red Bull.
Right, maybe. It gives you wings. Very good. Good joke there, Jonathan.
Yeah.
And then limbic system, and then there's another bit, and then a little bit of evidence for all of this. Here we go. Again, there's stuff in the book. The stuff with rats. We've not got a lot of time for that, but we can say that stuff here. Information from the eyes and ears travels first to the thalamus. Instinct. I've got instinct underlined in orange. And from there to the visual and auditory areas of the cortex. It used to be thought that sights and sounds were first experienced and then recognized in these cortical areas. Information about what had been recognized was then supposedly sent to the limbic system for an emotional reaction. It has been discovered, however, that in addition to this indirect route, thalamus, cortex, amygdala, there is a direct route from the thalamus to the amygdala. In other words, the amygdala, part of the limbic system, responds emotionally to objects in the world even before the cortex has experienced and recognized them. That's the part of that instinctive reaction where you can make those split-second reactions to things. I've got 2 little slides left, and then I've got to go, and then we've got to go. So what is it? That one, not that one, that one. Is it that one? It's this one. That's it. Right, then, here we go. So, I'll read through this for the folks. Because I had begun to regard emotion as an expression of instinct, I was no longer able to accept Jung's formulation of the function of perception. Emotional reactions are immediately bound up with their sensations. So-called feeling tone, together with reactions of liking and disliking, thus form, with sensation, a psychological entity that amuses Jonathan. In studying their mode of adaptation, when he looked at SE DOMs, in studying their mode of adaptation, I saw, in fact, more and more clearly that they were not guided exclusively by their sensations, but by their sensations coupled with their emotional reactions thereto, and further, by their instinctual needs as well. It seems, therefore, incorrect to me to regard sensation as the only characteristic factor in this function. Adaptation is here governed by emphases in regard to emotion and attention in the field of sensations, and that action is also directed by details of a concrete kind. So we could say that instinct is related to the concrete and intuition is related to the abstract. Right, so, and because then that makes it match up better with Kersey, because you've got an artisan instinct, sensation, stimulation, audacity, impulse, and then you've got guardian instinct, authority, belonging, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, security, the guardian instinct. And then, oh, that's not right, there's one more, we got to go, it's that one, this is the last one. Right, and then he gives the other features of it. The intuitive experience, there is spontaneous insight into relation to a certain group of facts, as a result of which they assume an added significance. This is something quite different from the practical instinctive knowledge which results from emphasis and sensation. We now see the sphere of conscious instinctual experience as a mode of conscious orientation, covering various items which nevertheless appear to us, coupled with our emotional and behavioral reactions thereto, as part of a single experience, bringing with it a practical form of knowledge, inseparable from the sensations involved. And the next sentence is probably how INTP am I? Emotional reactions.
Yeah, a sentence will tell you how INTP you are.
I think that sentence, I mean, it's very like configured. And then emotional reactions to sensation are frequently accompanied by an impulse to act. Again, this is like the instinct in artisans and guardians, especially artisans. In our conscious mind, this may assume various forms, e.g., that of a vague inclination to do something, or a strong impulsive drive towards certain acts, artisans. Or they may arise a certain mode of behavior determined more or less by habit, guardians. And then the know-how part. There's a certain kind of, and I think by him reframing sensing as instinct, and I call instincting, is that he adds these extra features to it, these extra capabilities that puts it on the same level as intuition. And so it's a special kind of know-how. It is impossible to say that this form of knowledge is chaotic. It is controlled by fixed associations of sensation and action. The original instinctual interest lend into things their primary meaning has led to further experiences, and as a result of which fresh emphases in the field of sensation have provided a secondary meaning, and these points attracted special attention are linked up by associated together. So this is probably why sensing types have got good kinesthetic intelligence and like split-second decisions in sports, whereas like literally like a third of a second having the right reaction to things. What amused you there, Jonathan, about split second? Oh, nothing. No. Right then. Right. Well, I finished, so you know. So, what do you think then, Joyce, of this? Any shower?
Yeah, it was amazing. I love Model V. It's amazing.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I love Jonathan's FE where he can't hide his reaction on his face, and it's just like.
Oh yes. If somebody wants to sit, I have a playlist of Jonathan's reactions to stuff that I've done, such as when I changed his oh, thank you, Danny. When I changed are you in any of my Facebook groups? I changed his name to the Scottish Yoda, and then he saw it and he went, oh, he was pleased at punch at that epithet, and that was a brilliant moment. It's a bit like that right now. He's going, oh, he went like that. It was a brilliant moment. All bashful.
Yeah. Hard to relate.
Yeah, Yoda is a key role model for Jonathan.
Well, it's go that far, but no, like Star Wars fan.
And then he got his reactions to things like saying things like "enough of this NE nonsense," because we spent like 2 hours on like this much of a page.
I think Joyce understands how that could happen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, and then there was when Monica talked about Jonathan's Scottish skirts and like his reaction to that.
What? I don't know.
And she said, "I've not seen your Scottish skirt, Jonathan." And he said, "No, it's called a kilt. It's called a kilt, Monica."
Oh yeah. Well, anyway, I think there's any nonsense has to come to the end because Joyce has somewhere to go.
Yeah.
So, thank you for having us on.
Yes.
Yeah. It was a joy to have you both on. And so, Jonathan, I love your facial reactions. It's a lot like me. Like, I can't hide how I feel. So people end up going like, hey, you're making that face. And then like, now we have to be called out. So I relate to that. I also love your wisdom, Jonathan. You have a lot of wisdom. You take a while to think about what you have to say, but when you say it, it's very wise. It's very sage-like, and you offer a lot of perspective. And I really enjoy hearing it.
That is true. Yes, I am very wise.
And he hadn't really talked about Enneagram. That really is his wheelhouse. That's Jonathan's wheelhouse, the Enneagram.
One of many wheelhouses.
Yeah. Ooh.
Yeah, I love that confidence. And yeah, Ben, thank you for showing the connections between the Enneagram, Kiersey, and Linda Behrens and Daria Nardi. All of this work combined into one and socionics in an elegant way. You're able to kind of take these concepts from different fields and combine them all together.
And try to be honest about socionics, not like be like, say, just like some people can be like, say, shills for NLP or shills for socionics, where like they're not honest about the bits in it that are good and bad. Like, try to be honest about what works in each system.
Because they're a product to sell.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So I like how you take what's true from each system and you combine them together. Yeah, and that's amazing. And you have these really great comprehensive definitions. And I love your SI stories about Jonathan. It's hilarious. You'll have all the little tales of him, and then Jonathan's making that face again, and he's like, "Dang
Well,
it, Ben."
in fact, I could show you once we're off air, I could show you the playlist. Well, later on, maybe after I could show you get your live reaction to these videos involving Jonathan. That would be fun.
I'm sure it'll be very amusing.
Yeah, there was one. Here's one. Look for the one with Mussolini, where I suggested that Jonathan had a facial resemblance to Mussolini, and Jonathan strongly objected to that. And then I asked him to do a Mussolini pose. That was it. Yeah, he's doing it. He's turned sideways, like, get the chin out.
Oh no.
Okay. Anyway, Joyce, you have a client to get to, so
Yes, sorry, Joyce.
wrap this up before we continues.
This is a pleasure.
Yep.
Yeah. Thank you for showing me your system and the diagram of the functions and how they play out and all your amazingness and all these citations from all these books. Like, it's amazing.
Oh, I didn't notice all these people, all these comments in the chat. There you go. That's what NE does. It takes you out of the moment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because by default, when you host, you see the comments, whereas so I didn't see, because I'm not used to this interface because I usually host.
Oh,
Definitely.
I saw them. But...
Well, that's because you, Jonathan, are usually a guest, and so you are aware to switch.
Yeah. Anyway.
It's fantastic. You really showed your Linda Barron style of informing today during this whole video. It really shows how the interaction styles have a lot of truth to them because we got to see it in real form. Yeah. And I love your TI, your ability to like see things that make sense and add things that are consistent with each other together into this really well-formed model. So yeah.
Well, thank you. But yeah, I mean, I will say when it comes from other sources, I don't want to pretend. I'll say when I've come up with stuff, but I also really want to say when it's somebody else has come up with stuff. So that's usually why I mention it. Yeah.
Yeah. So this was a fun time. I really got to see your NT come out, and you got to
Thank
show
you.
us all of this thorough information. Much appreciated. You both are a great dynamic duo. Yeah, and I'm glad to be both of your friends.
Oh, thank you.
Someone said we should collab again. So.
Yes, we can do. I mean, I'm happy to appear on your channel again, Joyce, and maybe the more structured formats. Or it's like, Ben, this is what we're talking about, and just this. And you have to appear on my channel as well.
Awesome. I'm looking forward to it. And thank you, everyone, for the wonderful live chat comments. And I'll see you all in the next episode. Bye.
Yes, wonderful comments I never saw.